All right, ready for a deep dive into a wine region you might not know much about, but you'll definitely want to after this.
Oh, I know the one.
We're talking about Uruguay.
Yeah, it doesn't always get the same buzz as, like, say, Argentina or Chile.
Right, exactly. Uruguay flies a little under the radar in the world of wine.
Hmm.
But that's kind of what makes it so fascinating. We're working with some really interesting sources today, articles, videos, all about peeling back the layers of Uruguayan wine.
And believe me, there are layers. It's a place where you can really, like, taste the history in the glass, you know?
Totally. One of the things that jumped out at me right away was the history. We're talking almost 500 years of winemaking tradition in Uruguay.
500 years, that's incredible. Imagine all the stories those vines could tell.
Right. It's not just like, oh, here's a nice Sauvignon Blanc. There's this whole backstory. Early colonists, Jesuit missions. You even had devastating plagues that reshaped how wine was made in the region.
Wow, yeah, it's like every bottle has this whole epic tale behind it.
And then you bring in those waves of immigrants, Italians, Spanish, French, each bringing their own grape varieties, their own winemaking philosophies.
It's like this amazing blend of cultures all coming together in the glass. You know, you mentioned Italian and Spanish immigrants. Think about it. You've got Sangiovese traditions blending with Tempranillo influences. That's got to lead to something unique, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And all of that is happening against this backdrop of, well, I wouldn't say chaos, but definitely resilience. It wasn't always a smooth ride for Uruguayan winemakers.
No, not at all. I mean, think about it. Plagues, political shifts, economic ups and downs. That kind of environment, it forces you to adapt. It breeds a certain, what's the word, tenacity in the winemaking.
And that really comes through in what we see today, this strong tradition of small, family-run wineries in Uruguay. It's not about mass production. It's about this deep connection to the land, this legacy of craftsmanship.
Exactly, and you can feel that when you visit these wineries. It's not unusual to meet the winemaker, the person whose family has been tending these vines for generations.
It's like stepping back in time, right? Where wine is so intertwined with family history, with a sense of place.
You got it. And that, my friend, that's where the magic of Uruguayan wine really begins.
And speaking of magic, that's a great segue into the next thing I wanted to talk about. Terroir. This idea that the place where the grapes are grown, the soil, the climate, it all leaves its fingerprint on the final wine.
Terroir is huge in Uruguay, yeah. You see, it's got this kind of Goldilocks situation going on, geographically speaking.
Goldilocks, like just right.
Exactly. You've got the Atlantic Ocean on one side, keeping things cool and breezy. Then you have this really interesting mix of soils inland. Some areas have these clay-rich deposits, others have more volcanic influence, so every little pocket, every valley, it gives you something a little bit different.
It's like each bottle of Uruguayan wine is a snapshot, a taste of that specific place.
I love that, a snapshot,
Yeah.
because it really is, it's capturing that moment in time, that interplay of nature and of course, the winemaker's skill.
So we've got history, we've got resilience, we've got this incredible sense of place. Now I'm dying to know, what about the actual wines? What should we be looking for when we crack open a bottle from Uruguay?
Okay, well, buckle up, because this is where things get really interesting. Uruguay might be small, but its range of wines. Anything but.
Yeah.
And it all starts with a grape you might not expect.
Okay, so we're ready to dive into the actual wines of Uruguay. What is the grape that really defines this region?
This might surprise you. It's not Malbec, which is what a lot of people think of with South America. Uruguay's star grape is Tanit.
Tanit. Okay, I have to admit I'm not super familiar with it. What should we know?
Well, think bold, think structure. Tanit is famous for its tannins, hence the name. They give it this really firm structure. It's got a deep color, almost inky. And these wines, they can age for decades.
Wow, decades. So we're talking about wines that can really evolve over time.
Exactly. And it makes sense when you think about what we were discussing earlier about those family wineries, you know, passing down traditions through generations. It's like Tanit was made for that kind of legacy.
I can see that.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because you usually hear about wines aging for a long time when you're talking about like Cabernet Sauvignon or Bordeaux blends. But Tanit, that's a whole other category.
All right. It's a different kind of experience. And what makes it even more interesting is how Tanit found its home in Uruguay. You know, it's originally from France.
Oh, really? I had no idea.
Yeah, it's true. But it thrives in Uruguay's climate and soil in a way it doesn't quite back home. You've got those Atlantic breezes, the mix of clay and well-drained soils in different areas. It creates the perfect conditions for Tanit to really shine.
So it's a grape that kind of found its soulmate in Uruguay.
Exactly. Like, it had the potential all along, but Uruguay really unlocked it.
Oh, that's a great way to put it. Now, you mentioned clay soils earlier, and I know we were talking about terroir. Does that come into play with tannin too? Like, do different soils in Uruguay actually change how the tannin tastes?
Oh, absolutely. 100%. You'll find, in general, that the clay soils give you tannins with a bit more structure, a little more firmness on the palate, and that plays into their aging potential. But then you go to a region with sandier soils, and you might get a tannin that's a bit brighter, more fruit forward. It's all part of the fun of exploring Uruguayan wines. You never know what little nuances you're going to find.
Okay, now you've officially got me wanting to plan a trip to Uruguay just to go wine tasting.
Right. It's an adventure for your taste buds.
It really seems like it. But before we get too carried away with tannin, I know there's more to Uruguay than just one grape.
Mhm.
What else should we be on the lookout for?
Well, for starters, remember that interesting tidbit about tannin having a high concentration of resveratrol?
Oh, right, the antioxidant that's supposed to be like the fountain of youth?
That's the one. And tannin has one of the highest concentrations of any grape. So not only is it delicious, it might just be good for you too.
I like the sound of that. But we were talking about other grapes. What else is hiding in those Uruguayan vineyards?
Well, remember how we were talking about Uruguay's microclimates and this dedication to expressing terroir? Well, tannin might be king, but there's a whole court of other grapes waiting to be discovered.
So tannin might be the king of Uruguayan wine, but there are other members of the royal family, right?
Exactly. Tannat's the bold one, the one with all the structure and history. But Uruguay's got a diverse range of grapes. And there's one in particular I think you'll find really interesting.
Oh, okay. You know I love discovering new grapes. What is it?
It's experiencing a revival in Uruguay.
Albarino.
Albarino. Okay, I know that one, but it's from Spain, right? Those really bright, kind of citrusy white wines.
You got it. And isn't it fascinating how a grape so connected to coastal Spain finds a second home on Uruguay's Atlantic coast? It is. I mean, it's not like they just said, oh, Albarino is trendy. Let's plant it. Something about it must really click with Uruguay's terroir.
Absolutely. Remember those well-drained soils we talked about that can make for those lighter tannins? Perfect for Albarino. The ocean breezes, too. They keep things cool, help the grapes ripen nice and slow.
So we're talking about those classic Albarino flavors like green apples, citrus, that little hint of saltiness, but with a Uruguayan twist, I'm guessing.
Exactly. Some winemakers say Uruguayan Albarinos have a bit more intensity, a richer texture than their Spanish cousins. Maybe it's all that sunshine or something in the soil, but there's a depth to them that's really exciting.
You know, it's so cool how Uruguay is forging its own path. It's not about copying what other regions are doing.
Yeah.
They're all about taking these grapes, Tannin, Albarino, whatever it is, and letting them express what makes Uruguay unique.
You said it. That dedication to terroir, to sustainable practices, to family traditions, that's what makes Uruguayan wine so captivating right now. Uruguay's got this amazing history, but it's also looking to the future. They're innovating and honoring their roots at the same time.
I love that. It's like they're saying, hey, come discover something new.
Yeah.
And honestly, I feel like we've just scratched the surface of what Uruguay has to offer.
There are so many more wines to try, more to learn. But for now, at least you've got a taste of what Uruguayan wine is all about, the history, the heart, the exciting journey it's on.
Cheers to that. And to anyone listening, if you're looking for a new wine adventure, check out Uruguay. You might just discover your new favorite bottle, and you'll definitely uncover a world of passion, tradition, and incredible flavors. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.